What's up, everybody? Welcome to an excellent return of Stay Schemin', man. It's good to be back. We've got some actual game film from games that matter, ultimately from week one. Obviously, the Chiefs start out 1-0 versus the Baltimore Ravens, and I'm excited to talk about it. Obviously, I am DMac Wake 316. You know me on Twitter, obviously from Tell the Truth earlier podcast on Kingdom Cast as a whole. Happy to be bringing this to you. And you obviously see it scrolling at the bottom what the topic is going to be today. Kingsley Suamataia, left tackle, rookie left tackle for the Chiefs, had a good start to his career. A little bit up and down, difficult matchup, gave up some pressure, did give up a sack, but most importantly, did what he needed to do in the terms of the offense. And it wasn't the easiest of matchups that he was given. I will say that certainly, or assignments from that standpoint. They left him out on island more often than you would say, but it's important to see the snaps in which they did in the context of what his matchup could look like coming up here on Sunday versus Trey Hendrickson of the Cincinnati Bengals, who individually had a great day for the Cincinnati Bengals. Of course, they start out 0-1, losing at home to the New England Patriots, partially to the ability that the Patriots were able to run the ball against the Cincinnati defense and mitigate how much pressure Trey was able to have, and obviously the struggles that they had on the other side of the ball there in Cincinnati. So we'll get into it, and we're going to start out specifically as far as the film is concerned, but a little bit first as far as the context for each of these players and what type of days that they had during their Week 1 games. So to start out, Kingsley Suamataia had a very, I would say, a solid game week one. Ultimately speaking, he did end up only allowing one pressure, which again sounds great for a rookie left tackle starting out in his first game versus a very good defense. That being said, pressure did end up in a sack, and partially it's not fully his fault. The reason why that sack happened, but obviously not a rep that he's going to want that back. And there were reps throughout the day in which he did lose to some of the edge rushers for the Ravens that fortunately Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid's scheme mitigated its factors and how much it actually limited what the offense can do, as I think the offense certainly had a good day versus the Baltimore Ravens in general. So important to keep in mind that even though the box score may only, or the advanced box score may only say that he only gave up one pressure, ultimately speaking, there's more to it than that when you're talking about breaking down trench film, because there is a whole entire scheme, and then obviously the greatest negative play limiter from the quarterback position in Patrick Mahomes that can make tackles look better, certainly than the box score may end up saying. On the flip side, Trey Hendrickson led the team with 6 pressures. The rest of the defensive line for the Cincinnati Bengals ended up having 7 themselves, so he almost outpaced the entire D-line put together. And that was kind of the story of this from the standpoint of Trey Hendrickson could win no matter pretty much where he lined up, but specifically against the left tackle. Ultimately speaking, he didn't always get the help. And that complementary pass rush is something that I've talked about in the past. It's important to actually get the quarterback on the ground and affect the quarterback from the standpoint of if you don't have multiple guys running on the play, a lot of times good quarterbacks specifically, especially mobile ones, will be able to mitigate that pressure that one guy ends up bringing by being able to make a miss, stepping up in the pocket, moving out in and out of certain gaps, or getting the ball out on time and structure. If it's not a quick win, then ultimately your pass rush win is not going to matter because that good quarterback can mitigate it from that standpoint, or the rest of the offensive line does their job and gives the quarterback enough answers to move in the pocket. So those are the major things from that standpoint. Trey Hendrickson had a good individual game. The rest of the defensive line did not necessarily live up to that standard, and ultimately Jacoby Brissett was able to make a few plays here and there, and most importantly, mitigate a few negative plays as well, in which Trey Hendrickson's pressure could have caused more damage than it ended up doing. So to start out, we're kind of going to go roll through a few of the plays from Kings that I think are really pertinent. Some reps that he wins and handles well, some different ways in which the Chiefs kind of show help to his side or give him help ultimately, and how it can be, again, compared and contrasted in the context of what, Trey Hendrickson faced as far as the Patriots in week 1 was concerned. So we're starting out here. Obviously, Pacheco to the left of Mahomes on Kingsley's side. And this is ultimately a rep where Pacheco technically does not end up chipping, but Kingsley does a really good job at winning this rep. Stays balanced, gets head inside, does lean a little bit, but ultimately only after setting properly and being able to push 99 away around the pocket. And that ultimately gives Mahomes enough time to get the ball out. This next rep, you're looking at a 2 tight end set, 12 personnel that the Chiefs love to live in. And what this ultimately does is it gives the defense a little bit of a different look, specifically from the edge position. Makes them widen out. It doesn't necessarily allow them to be easily chipped. And then it also gives Kingsley a good look at saying, hey, this guy's a little wider. That's an angle that I got a kick set to, but it is one where it's a little bit limiting from the standpoint of what the edge can do as well. And so you'll watch here, they put the guy in motion, get off the snap. Kingsley sets outside. Now, look, a key thing here, because Kingsley does end up messing up on this rep from the standpoint of he sets a little bit too far outside, and that ends up allowing to spin back inside. And that's one thing that you do not want to do from two standpoints. A, the tight end is already there widening out the edge. Okay, so you know where you got to go, but you have to stay balanced. You have to have the ability to stay balanced. And specifically, they send Pacheco to the left side on top of that. Kingsley knows he has helps to his outside shoulder. That is the way that Pacheco is told to release on this route. It's not like he's releasing necessarily through the C gap here, or the B gap, I should say. He's not releasing through the B gap. Kingsley knows it's coming to his outside shoulder, and that's where Pacheco ends up going. And instead of having and using that chip help by being able to stay a little bit more inside, and Kyle Van Noy knows that outside shoulder is going to be cut off to him, Kyle Van Noy spins back inside. Kingsley is leaning off balance forward, and then that help from Pacheco is then mitigated. And that's really the issue. When you have that help mitigated, then Kyle Van Noy has a straight line to the pocket and nothing in between him. And ultimately speaking, this is not a good rep for Kingsley Suamataia, but it's important to keep in the context of, hey, you have a great quarterback in Patrick Mahomes. He's not going to panic under pressure. He is able to get that ball out to Isaiah Pacheco, and he's able to create it into a big game. And those are sometimes, and that's the perks. One of the perks, I should say, of being on the Chiefs is you have the best quarterback in the world that can mitigate your mistakes. And then obviously you have the best offensive coach in the world that can also mitigate your mistakes. The next rep here, 13 personnel, still tied in to Kingsley Suamataia's left shoulder, obviously widening out that edge rusher once again. The important thing here is that he is going to get chip help, but he stays much more balanced, able to deal with the inside move. He's able to control the ability for Oweh to try an inside counter with his inside right hand, which is a little bit hidden from us. And then he stabs with his outside hand. Obviously, there's a little bit of an ability with that outside hand stab. If Oweh wants to swipe it and go outside, he could get him. But that's where the chip help comes in, and why it's important that Kingsley learns from his earlier mistake of saying, I can't give up the inside. That's the most important part. And Pacheco will help me on the outside if that's necessary. So we'll go ahead and let it run here. Again, we're getting 13 personnel, a little bit of an under center play action with a man in motion, obviously starting out as Mahomes end up setting the protection. And again, just watched how balanced Kingsley is with his footwork. And again, he's generally really good with his feet. It's just sometimes he gets a little bit off balance a little bit later into the rep and starts leaning. Here, stays there. Pacheco is flashing at Oweh. It doesn't necessarily hit him, but just because Oweh knows that threat exists, then Oweh doesn't try and go outside as much as he possibly can. He just kind of has this stuck trying to bull rush through him, and Kingsley ends up stonewalling that. And look, get a clean pocket for Patrick Mahomes to do what he does best, which is make high-level throws and fit in between two all-pros here in the middle of the field to Noah Gray. Newly minted extension Noah Gray is exactly what 15 does best, ultimately speaking. So last rep here. Kingsley right here is going to end up being on an island once again, one-on-one with the edge rusher from the Baltimore Ravens. But the key that I want people to watch, in addition to what happens to Kingsley, is what happens to Joe Thuney, because both of them work in concert, and it's an example of what happens if Trey Hendrickson gets a little bit of help, how things can go wrong. So obviously Kingsley gets beat around the edge, and ultimately speaking, there's room there for Mahomes to possibly step up until Joe Thuney gets walked back into his space. And you got to give a shout out to 98 Jones for the Ravens. Did a really good job shutting down that ability from Mahomes to step up in the pocket by walking Thuney back. He walks him probably a good 5 yards back. So where if Thuney is able to block him a little bit earlier, Mahomes can step up, allow Kingsley to push him around the pocket, ultimately speaking, because Thuney gets walked back. Kingsley getting beat around the edge comes into play. You got to give a lot of credit to David Ojabo for a very good rush from that standpoint. So again, one last look at it. Thuney gets walked back, cuts off Mahomes' step-up opportunity. Kingsley can't push him around, can't push Ojabo around the pocket from that aspect. And that's just an example of what can go wrong if you do not end up having, or I should say, what can go wrong if you do have complementary pass rush and multiple guys winning at one time, compared to one guy winning, as we saw in the first clip, can be mitigated by good quarterback play and, generally speaking, the rest of the offensive line doing their job. Next up, we're going to look at Trey Hendrickson's film versus Week 1 versus the Patriots, and it's important to remind yourself, the Patriots left tackle is kind of the entirety of their offensive line right now is in flux. It's not going through great things. So, lower quality of competition that we're dealing with here, but it's important to look at the context in which Trey Hendrickson was able to create those 6 pressures versus the Patriots Week 1, and how it can be important and inform what is going to be thrown at Kingsley Suamataia here. So starting out, Trey, no tight end to his side, does have a running back starting out here. And you're going to look at a 5-man front from the Bengals, trying to create those one-on-ones to ultimately, make sure you're isolating each one of these offensive linemen. It's going to be a similar look that you're probably going to end up seeing, specifically so that they get one-on-ones for Trey Hendrickson versus Kingsley Suamataia. Be interesting to see if there's any help given to Kingsley in those moments. But specifically here, you see each one of these 5-down linemen is going to be taken on by one of the 5 offensive linemen and targeted from this standpoint. Now, Trey gets a little bit of complimentary pass rush here, and ultimately speaking, that forces Jacoby Brissett to get the ball out of his hands, as you'll see here. Runs around the edge, pocket gets pushed a little bit. Jacoby still ends up making a pretty accurate pass, I will say, about as accurate as you possibly can ask for in that circumstance. The wide receiver can't haul it in. The Bengals end up using a stunt here to create a little bit more pressure alongside with Trey. So again, 5-man front, creating one-on-ones. Then you add the added havoc of running a stunt with the nose tackle and his 3 tech to his left, creating a little bit more confusion on the right side of that line, while Trey Hendrickson wins around the edge of the left side. That's a lot to deal with from a quarterback's perspective. And if the offensive lineman doesn't handle that stunt along with the one-on-ones well, then you can get pressure on the quarterback. And obviously that's what ends up happening here. So ultimately speaking, Trey Hendrickson's pressure does affect the quarterback from the aspect of in front of him, there was some chaos going on, and that allows Trey Hendrickson to get to his back shoulder and just affect him a little bit, even though Jacoby does end up making a pretty good throw. Now here is another example of one-on-one, and ultimately speaking, Trey Hendrickson versus the left tackle. Not a 5-man front this time, but because it takes a little bit longer for Trey to win, first and foremost, and the rest of the offensive line does its job, Jacoby Brissett is able to find an outlet here on the drag route. And obviously he still takes the hit, but again, veteran quarterbacks know that they have an internal clock to get the ball out of their hands. And ultimately speaking, when Trey Hendrickson's one-on-one takes a little bit of time to end up coming to fruition and the rest of the offensive line does its job, then Trey Hendrickson running that edge takes a little bit longer for him to get to the quarterback. And that's enough time for Jacoby Brissett to get the ball out underneath for a completion. And again, that's just an example of if the complementary pass rush doesn't match up with what Trey Hendrickson can do off the edge, then you can still have successful plays, even if the left tackle loses in that circumstance as well. Another example of not getting enough help, and this one will end up leading to a Jacoby Brissett scramble on this standpoint. Again, now this one's important to match up. 12 personnel, tight end that is going to be on the left tackle side, going to end up widening out Trey. And again, puts a little bit of delay in what his pass rush is going to end up looking like. Trey ends up reducing down this time, though, to try and get a different angle. Fakes inside, counters outside, takes a little bit longer, does eventually get to that edge. But again, not getting a lot of help Jacoby Brissett from, or I should say not getting a lot of help Trey Hendrickson in this case to try and get to Jacoby Brissett. The rest of the offensive line is doing its job. And ultimately speaking, Jacoby Brissett steps up a little bit, just enough to escape out the left side, and is able to scramble for the first down ultimately on 3rd and 3. And again, or 2nd and 3, my apologies. And it's important to keep in mind, once again, Trey Hendrickson can win these matchups. Obviously, he's going to reduce down here specifically. But the offensive line, if it does its job, more often than not, the quarterback can mitigate those things. And obviously, Patrick Mahomes is a little bit better than Jacoby Brissett to do so. And that's why Trey Hendrickson, even with those pressures, did not have as impactful a day as maybe those numbers would suggest, because the rest of the team didn't necessarily help him out to that standpoint. Now, this one here, Trey Hendrickson is essentially going to run this rep kind of all by himself in the standpoint of he's going to bull rush right into left tackle, does not get, any type of help from the running back coming out of the backfield. And Jacoby Brissett is going to have a hard time trying to get this ball out because Trey Hendrickson puts the left tackle in his lap, ultimately speaking. And he gets right there, obviously gets a hit on the quarterback. Jacoby Brissett would like to lay that out a little bit more to the back pylon to get the ball to Hunter Henry. But of course, it's a little bit short, and ultimately speaking, that ends up in a incomplete pass. But again, you can see Trey Hendrickson just kind of go right through, swipe inside, or I should say inside rip, and get right to Jacoby Brissett, and he can't step into the throw effectively. And sometimes if you allow that inside move, kind of as we were talking about Kingsley Suamataia on that second clip where Pacheco was coming to help on the outside, but he gave up that inside shoulder, that direct line to the quarterback can cause more havoc than certainly being able to push a guy around the pocket. Now, I told you to make sure that you remember what happened on that last clip as far as the sack was concerned. Again, talking about the complementary pass rush helping out the edge rusher that is a star guy and maybe can take advantage of some mismatches. So again, Ojabo is going to beat Kingsley around the edge at the top of your screen. The 3 tech that lined up in the B gap specifically is going really more of a 2-eye is going to end up pushing and bull rushing Joe Tooney, the left guard, back into Patrick Mahomes' lap, and that's going to not allow Patrick to scramble and escape accordingly. But what that's going to do is mirror what you see at the bottom of the screen. Again, 3 tech guy lined up this time on the outside of the left guard's shoulder. Trey Hendrickson lined up on the outside of the left tackle. He's going to beat the left tackle around the edge. The defensive tackle to his left is going to bull rush and beat the left guard back into Jacoby Brissett, going to make it difficult for Jacoby to end up escaping. And the best, it's going to throw the entire play off and not allow anything to happen in structure and result in Jacoby just having to throw the ball away. So obviously we'll walk you through it right here as well. Again, watch both these edge rushers get around the edge, be able to beat both of their guys. 98, the defensive tackle going up against the left guard, gets a good bull rush, putting him back into the quarterback's lap. Ultimately speaking, that throws a play off out of structure. Patrick Mahomes is sacked at the top of the screen, and Jacoby Brissett has no choice but to throw it away at the bottom of the screen. And again, this is all about complementary pass rush, being able to put guys in difficult positions, trying to target left tackles with your star edge rusher to make it difficult for the quarterback to deliver the football, specifically on time, but also in general. And again, when you walk that defensive tackle back into the quarterback's lap and you have the edge rusher coming around the arc and be able to get to that back upper shoulder and forcing the quarterback to kind of panic a little bit, you can get a sack at the top of the screen, or at the very least, disrupt the play and end up taking it out of structure and forcing the quarterback to throw the ball away. So that's my bit as far as Trey Hendrickson versus Kingsley Suamataia is concerned. Again, going to be very interesting. They left him on an island to start out as far as this actual game was concerned, week 1 versus the Ravens, more often than not. How often are they going to switch that game plan as Luan Moreno and the Bengals defense in general is going to try and get Trey matched up one-on-ones with both tackles, but specifically Kingsley, and also try and create that complementary pass rush against the rest of the offensive line to disrupt Patrick Mahomes. Again, interesting to see how Andy Reid specifically schemes up maybe mitigating those factors with a running back, tight end chip help, just in general, a lot of things. You know that they're going to try and live out of 13, 12 personnel, especially with the unfortunate Hollywood Brown news, him being ruled out not just for this week, but it seems like for the foreseeable future, at least into January. You're going to see a lot of tight ends to Kingsley Suamataia's side, and it's going to be fascinating to see how much more help they want to give him in this specific matchup, since Trey presents an even greater threat than what you saw from the edge rushers of the Baltimore Ravens in week 1 that were pretty good. You're talking about Ojabu, Van Noy, and Owe as well. So that is what I'm going to be watching specifically from the offensive side of the ball. So a little bit about the other side of the ball as far as the Chiefs defense versus the Bengals offense. A different challenge than you've seen in years past. Obviously, last year was Jake Browning. Years before that, you got the full Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase experience. This game will be missing T. Higgins, and specifically will be earlier on in the season. And also no Joe Mixon, needs to be said from the Bengals run game standpoint. But this specifically on those passing downs, because I think this team should be able to keep them into difficult down distances in a similar way in which the Patriots were able to, because the Bengals couldn't run the ball all that well. If you get them behind the sticks, you're going to be set up with Jamar Chase, where he needs to have 4 eyes on him at all times, which we saw continually, specifically in the 2022 AFC Championship game. And I say the 2022 AFC Championship game because it's important to remember that was with all of the rookie cornerbacks, Trey McDuffie, Joshua Williams, Jalen Watson. No L'Jarius Sneed. Tyler Boyd also went out of that game. So we're getting a look at kind of what it can look like with just these three three younger cornerbacks versus Jamar Chase, and should be T. Higgins, but in this case, it's not going to be T. Higgins in their secondary pass catchers. But that only emphasizes keeping 4 eyes on Jamar Chase at all times, and also being able to continue to mitigate what those secondary pass catchers can do. We're going to show some fond memories, at least for Chiefs Kingdom in this current case. Taking you back to that 2022 AFC Championship game. Again, McDuffie, Watson, and Williams are at corner. T. Higgins is to the bottom of your screen. T. Higgins is in the slot at the top of your screen. Jamar Chase is at the bottom of your screen, matched up. And you're going to see essentially what the Chiefs are going to want to do on difficult passing downs. They want to keep 4 eyes on Jamar Chase and dare everybody else to kind of beat him. And no, T. Higgins makes this even more of a viable strategy from that standpoint. But you're going to see, obviously, these 2 key interceptions that help the Chiefs to go to the Super Bowl versus the Eagles and ultimately win the first of their back-to-back Super Bowls back there in 2022. Right here, you're going to see Jamar Chase, bottom of the screen. He's got a safety on him. He's got the cornerback playing underneath. That leaves Jalen Watson in the slot one-on-one with T. Higgins. You get some solid pass rush, nothing too crazy, but Carlos Dunlap is closing on Joe Burrow, and Burrow has to get the ball out. Mind you, this was a point in time late in the game in which Burrow had been harassed multiple times by the Chiefs defensive line. And ultimately speaking, Watson gets eyes on the quarterback and is able to make a great play on the ball, beating T. Higgins down the field. And that's an interception as well. And you can see it from the end zone angle, the same thing. Carlos Dunlap makes a very good rush off the end to go ahead and affect Joe Burrow from the right tackle, giving up a little bit of inside pressure. Burrow feels the heat, got to get the ball out. Watson ends up staying inside and making a great play on the ball. And we saw Watson had a very good game versus the Bengals in week 1. It's going to be important for him to repeat that performance. A, if he's going to be the guy that's on Jamar Chase and getting help from the safety, or B, when he's taking off some of the secondary receivers, if they choose to go McDuffie versus Jamar Chase. Certainly it could be a shadow matchup. Be interesting to see if that ends up happening. But very specifically, they have to be able to shut down these secondary wide receivers that did do much versus the Patriots. They should be able to have a similar performance as well versus these guys, whether it's Andre Joseph, whether it's Mike Gesicki as the tight end, or Jermaine Burton as well, the rookie that they drafted out of Alabama. The second play here, obviously second interception later on in the game. I'm going to see Jamar Chase once again, top of the screen, safety to his side, already shaded. Brian Cook kind of nailing down, playing where the running back is going to end up being, but he is going to end up bailing to a too high man technique. It is going to be something that I think you see a lot of too high man to make sure that they stay out of difficult, easy reads for Joe Burrow to get the ball out. Too high with the man coverage underneath is going to be something that I think you see on a consistent basis. Is what the Patriots kind of stayed with. Did not get a lot of pressure on Joe Burrow, but they did force Joe Burrow to get the ball out quickly and down in kind of in short to intermediate areas on a consistent basis. He had an incredibly low ADOT, which is average depth of target. And ultimately speaking, you want to mitigate the big plays in the Bengals and force them to be efficient moving the ball down the field, which they generally have issues with when they have T. Higgins early on in the season, and certainly showed issues with as far as week 1 was concerned in trying to sustain drives. You want them to have to try and do those things because they can't run the ball all that well. And now they only have Jamar Chase as a difference-making pass catcher for Joe Burrow to get the ball to. So, again, bottom of the screen, T. Higgins going to end up having a safety high to his side. Jamar Chase at the top of the screen going to have a safety high to his side. And those two are going to be able to keep 4 eyes on their main pass-catching threats. Joe Burrow is going to be affected by a little bit of pressure, and they're going to rush 3 here and still get home with Carlos Dunlap coming around the edge. They drop an extra guy in coverage just to make sure that nothing crazy happens. T. Higgins bracketed at the bottom of the screen. Jamar Chase bracketed in the middle around the numbers at the top of the screen as well. Not a lot of good options for Joe Burrow, but he has to get the ball out. And so he throws a 50-50 ball to T. Higgins. Brian Cook makes an excellent play, also a rookie in this game, getting his head around, tipping the ball for Joshua Williams to end up bringing it in. And again, got to give a lot of credit to Carlos Dunlap being able to get around the edge here versus his old team and create that pressure. Forces Joe Burrow to get the ball out of his hands. And look, there are times in which he's going to trust T. Higgins. It's not going to happen in this game, and that means that he's going to have to trust guys like Yaja Yoshavats or Jermaine Burton to make plays. That should play into the Chiefs defensive backs' hands of winning those matchups more often than not, and also being able to create some turnovers off of that, because Joe Burrow is not somebody that is just going to hold the ball for the sake of holding the ball. If you rattle him early, get some pressure on him, then you can end up getting after him and affecting him to the point where he just is going to take those shots. And that's exactly what you want. It's an excellent play by Brian Cook, by the way. But yeah, so that's the Chiefs' defensive keys as far as being able to force the Bengals to sustain drives without a good run game, take away those big plays by keeping a safety over the top of Jamar Chase at all times, and also doing a little bit of too high man in general, which obviously Steve Spagnuolo loves to live in. So those are the defensive keys. We obviously went through the Trey Hendrickson versus Kingsley Suamataia offensive matchup that'll be interesting for the Chiefs. Ultimately, I think it's going to be, a very fun game for the Chiefs. They should, in my opinion, handle the Bengals, and it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening. But I'm excited for this. Going to be a lot of fun. Make sure you guys come to check out Tell the Truth on Tuesdays. We will come in and wrap everything up. Obviously, Kingdom Cast here on Thursdays as well. And you might have another Stay Schemin coming your way next week. But appreciate you guys for right now. I'm DMac Wake 316.